They say a mother should never have to bury her child. But what happens when the world tries to bury her dignity too? It was supposed to be a day of honor. A day for tears, remembrance, folded flags, and the quiet strength of military tradition. But for General Naomi Westbrook, the highest-ranking black female officer in U.S. Army history, it became something else entirely. Something darker, something that would pull the veil off a system so deeply infected with racism, even a Medal of Honor couldn't shield her. Naomi stood at the gates of Jefferson Memorial Cemetery, her dress uniform perfectly pressed, every medal aligned, every crease deliberate. She looked like she'd stepped out of a war memorial, but no monument could prepare her for this. Today wasn't about service. It was about loss. Her only son, Captain Elijah Westbrook, had been killed during deployment in Afghanistan. She'd buried brothers in arms before, but not her child. The sun beat down mercilessly on the Texas earth as mourners began to gather. Soldiers in uniform, family in black, veterans old and young, clutching American flags against their hearts. Naomi's daughter Ava, an attorney with the same fire as her mother, helped her out of the car, noticing her mother's stoic silence. "You sure you're okay?" she asked softly. Naomi only nodded, but inside something twisted. Not just grief, but the sense that something was off. At first it was small things. A cemetery director who avoided eye contact. A sudden change in Elijah's burial location, moved from the section reserved for heroes of the Afghan War to an older, overgrown corner known, locally, though unofficially, as the colored section. Naomi didn't say a word. She simply handed over a contract, military regulations, and Ava's business card. "Fix it," she said flatly. The director stumbled through apologies, but it was already there, the feeling, the shift in air, like the calm before a storm. Then came the officers. 20 of them. Naomi recognized the lead one immediately. Officer Brent Holloway, white, late 40s, the same man who had humiliated her 3 days prior at the airport security checkpoint, forcing her to remove her jacket, mocking her medals, suggesting her uniform was fake. A black woman? A general? Come on, he'd laughed. That day she let it go, for Elijah. Today she saw the same man standing at the main entrance of the cemetery with a clipboard. "We've got elevated security today," he announced. "Funeral of a high-preferenceful military figure." Naomi raised an eyebrow as she approached. "I assume you mean my son." Holloway didn't flinch. "We're just doing our job, ma'am." It started subtly. White mourners passed through easily, but black family members, black soldiers, black veterans, they were stopped, questioned, bags searched, IDs scrutinized. Cameras hovered nearby, but no one seemed to notice or care. Naomi watched silently as 2 of Elijah's former unit members, both black, were denied entry. Security concerns, they were told. Ava was livid. "This is segregation. It's illegal." But Naomi stopped her. Today is about Elijah, not them. Still, the tension crackled, and then something deeply symbolic happened. The honor guard, the same men who had trained alongside Elijah, were forced to rehearse in front of an audience of armed officers glaring their way. One of the soldiers whispered to Naomi, "We're being watched, and not for protocol." Naomi's instincts, sharpened by 3 wars and decades in command, knew this wasn't oversight. This was orchestration. But the final sign came in a manila envelope. No return address. No markings. Just the weight of warning. Inside was a crude sketch. A stick figure in a general's hat, standing at a gravesite. Over the head, a red bullseye. At the bottom, a partial fingerprint. It was clear. Standard police ink. Naomi said nothing. She walked out of the administration office and stood under the live oaks, staring at the rows of headstones, trying to remember the sound of her son's laugh. Ava joined her. "We can pull the plug on this, Mom. Move the ceremony. Go private." Naomi looked at her daughter, calm but unshakable. Elijah died in uniform. He'll be honored in uniform. Let them try. That night, the cameras rolled quietly into town. The funeral of Captain Elijah Westbrook, son of a legend, was set to draw national attention. What the world didn't know was that it wouldn't just expose grief, it would expose a conspiracy. And tomorrow, a gun would be pointed at a general's head. But not yet. Tonight, Naomi stood by her son's photo in the hotel room, her eyes wet, but her jaw locked with steel. "I will not let them bury you in silence," she whispered. And somewhere in the shadows, a secret organization known as the Gatekeepers began final preparations. because they thought this general had no more fight left in her. They were wrong. The morning sun rose over Jefferson Memorial Cemetery, casting a golden light across the white marble rows. The flag above the main gate hung at half-staff, rippling gently in the breeze. It looked peaceful, honorable, but just beneath the surface, something rotten stirred. Lieutenant General Naomi Westbrook arrived at precisely 7:00 a.m., 3 hours before the service. Her uniform was flawless, a quiet act of defiance against the chaos she anticipated. She carried herself like a soldier reporting for battle, not a mother preparing to bury her son. Ava was already there, overseeing last-minute arrangements, and more importantly, checking the newly installed private security cameras positioned discreetly around the burial site. They weren't taking chances. Marcus, Elijah's old squad leader, approached her with a clipboard and a grim face. "General, we've got eyes on Holloway and at least a dozen others patrolling the perimeter." "How bad?" Naomi asked, not flinching. "They're checking credentials, but only for the black mourners. We've already had 4 turned away, told they weren't on the list. A list that doesn't exist." Naomi's jaw clenched. Let them record it all. By 9:00 a.m., the crowd had grown. Over 300 mourners had gathered. Soldiers in uniform, veterans, family, and friends. News vans lined the outer road, their satellites pointing skyward. The media presence guaranteed one thing: what was about to unfold would not stay hidden. And that made the gatekeepers nervous. Officer Brent Holloway stood near the front gate, radio in hand. He was wearing his tactical gear like armor. Around him, his crew of hand-picked officers, every one of them confirmed gatekeeper loyalists, moved into position. They weren't there for safety. They were there for control. White mourners were ushered in smoothly, directed to the prime seating area near the burial platform. Black mourners, however, were corralled into a separate section, behind a line of orange barricades hastily assembled just that morning. Security protocol, they were told. Sensitive event. Ava stormed up to Holloway. "This is illegal segregation. These are active-duty officers and veterans." Holloway smirked. "Protocol's protocol. You can file a complaint later." Naomi stepped between them. "No, let it play out. We document everything, every insult, every barrier, and then..." It began. The chaplain's voice trembled as he opened the ceremony, speaking of honor, service, and the price of freedom. Naomi sat ramrod straight, flanked by Ava and her father, a Vietnam veteran who wore his old uniform with quiet pride. Elijah's flag-draped casket rested on the ceremonial stand, surrounded by a full honor guard, and Officer Holloway was getting closer. He paced the sidelines, whispering into his shoulder mic. Other officers subtly adjusted their positions, surrounding the site like it was a perimeter in a combat zone. But it wasn't Naomi they were watching. It was their own trap. When Naomi rose to speak, the atmosphere shifted. The crowd leaned in. She walked slowly to the podium, past her son's casket, her boots silent on the grass. "My son," she began, her voice unwavering, "was a man who believed in this country, even when it didn't believe in him. He served with honor. He died with dignity. And now, they want to bury him in shame." A murmur passed through the crowd. "Elijah was investigating something," she continued, "a pattern, a network of intimidation targeting black service members like him. He found names, he documented harassment, and when he got close to the truth, his deployment changed." From the back, Holloway took a step forward. "I have his last message," Naomi said, pulling out a folded letter. He wrote, "Mom, if anything happens to me, expose them. They're not just racist, they're organized." And that's when it happened. Holloway surged forward, yelling, "She's reaching for a weapon!" Gasps ripped through the crowd. Officers drew their guns, one Firo called. Officer Daniels fired a shot into the air, panic. Naomi stood frozen, the letter still in hand. Holloway tackled her to the ground, pressing a knee into her back as he screamed, "She's resisting!" The crowd erupted. Ava screamed. Cameras flashed. Veterans shouted. Several soldiers tried to intervene but were immediately threatened at gunpoint. And then a voice boomed through the chaos. "What in God's name is going on?" A tall black man in a Navy suit pushed through the line. Behind him, 2 agents flashed federal badges. "FBI Special Agent Damon Carter," he barked. "Release the general, now." Holloway didn't move. "This is local jurisdiction." She reached for a weapon. "There is no weapon," Agent Carter snapped. I've got 20 eyewitnesses and 3 live streams that say otherwise. Ava stepped forward, her phone held high. We have video, everything. You're done. But Holloway doubled down. She's under arrest. The words hung in the air like poison. Naomi, still on the ground, whispered, just loud enough for the cameras to hear, "Not today." It was the same thing she had said at the airport, the same thing she had said before. The moment became electric. Cameras from every direction zoomed in on her soiled uniform, the blood on her cheek from being shoved, the broken dignity of a soldier kneeling beside her son's grave. Agent Carter stepped forward. "Then let the world see what your justice looks like." The choice was made. And Holloway chose the wrong side of history. As officers dragged Naomi to the squad car, veterans and the crowd saluted her, not because she had fallen, but because she had refused to break. What began as a funeral was now a firestorm. The gatekeepers had fired their shot, and the nation was watching. By the time Lieutenant General Naomi Westbrook arrived at the county jail, her wrists still cuffed and her uniform torn, the world had already seen what happened. The footage had spread like wildfire. One clip, taken by a retired Air Force sergeant hiding his phone in his jacket pocket, showed the entire sequence. Naomi calmly reading her son's letter, Holloway yelling she's reaching, a warning shot fired into the air, and then the takedown. Naomi's body hitting the ground next to her son's casket, her daughter's scream, the chaos, the salutes. Within 2 hours, the video had over 8 million views on every platform imaginable. Hashtags exploded: Justice for Naomi, funeral, arrest, expose the gatekeepers. But inside the jail, none of that mattered. Naomi was denied her phone call. Her request to remove her damaged uniform was ignored. She was searched, fingerprinted multiple times. Deliberately and roughly, booking officers sneered, one of them muttering, "You think your stars mean something in here?" And yet, even behind bars, Naomi didn't bend. She sat straight on the cold bench, eyes focused, mind alert. She knew this wasn't just about punishing her. It was about destroying her credibility. They wanted her silenced before the investigation could start. Meanwhile, outside, a movement was forming. Veterans, many in uniform, gathered outside the jail, standing shoulder to shoulder in silent protest. Members of Elijah's unit formed a line around the entrance. News helicopters hovered above. Reporters scrambled to cover what was quickly becoming a national scandal. And then came the voice that changed everything. Special Agent Damon Carter of the FBI held a press conference on the jail's front steps. What we witnessed today was not a security response. It was a coordinated act of intimidation. We are actively investigating members of Houston law enforcement in connection with a broader civil rights conspiracy. General Westbrook will not face these charges alone. Within minutes, the jail was flooded with calls from federal attorneys, civil rights groups, and Pentagon officials demanding Naomi's release. But the system wasn't letting go that easily. A local judge, William Harper, a longtime gatekeeper sympathizer, denied bail, citing public safety concerns, and labeling Naomi a potential threat to law enforcement officers. The implication was clear: keep her locked up, isolate her, break her. Back in her cell, Naomi received a visit from correctional officer Layla Morris, a quiet woman with a conflicted look. "I shouldn't be doing this," she whispered, handing Naomi a burner phone hidden in a food tray. "But I served in Iraq. You were our commanding officer's commanding officer. You brought him home. And you'll get out of this." Naomi made one call. Ava answered on the first ring. "Mom, you're on every screen in America. You've become a symbol. Even the Pentagon called. They're furious." Naomi kept her voice steady. "Judge Harper is blocking bail. I need Agent Carter to look into him. He was on Marcus's suspect list." A pause. "We're on it. The media's not letting go of this, and neither are we." That night, Naomi didn't sleep. The lights in her cell stayed on, the temperature was dropped to freezing, and guards checked her every 15 minutes. Classic psychological warfare, something she knew well from her own military training. She was being worn down on purpose. But they underestimated her resilience. By morning, the protests had grown to over 1,000 people. Civil rights leaders arrived. Celebrities began tweeting. Military organizations released joint statements calling for Naomi's immediate release and an investigation into systemic racism within law enforcement and the military. And then something broke. Officer Chen, a young Asian American officer who had worked with Naomi's son Elijah on his investigation into the gatekeepers, was found badly beaten in the parking garage of his apartment building. His injuries were severe: broken ribs, a fractured skull, but he survived. Agent Carter visited him in the hospital. Chen, barely able to speak, whispered one name: Judge Harper. The pieces started falling into place. Chen had been collecting evidence for months, and he'd hidden the most damning recordings in a private backup system untouched by his attackers. Recordings of meetings, names, conversations between Holloway, Judge Harper, and even State Senator Gregory Maddox, the man many believed to be the political godfather of the Gatekeepers. That evening, Naomi was finally released, pending federal review, after Judge Harper's decision was overruled by a higher court under emergency order. She stepped out into blinding camera flashes, a crowd roaring her name, and rows of soldiers standing at salute. Naomi stood tall in her soiled uniform, her voice calm but firm. "I did not serve this country for 30 years to be silenced in grief. I will not be broken, and I will not let the people responsible for my son's death hide behind badges, robes, or titles." The media erupted, headlines flashed. General Westbrook declares war on corruption. As she walked toward her waiting daughter, a federal agent leaned in and whispered, "You're not just fighting police now, you're fighting the men who own the system." Naomi didn't hesitate. "Then let's hit them where it hurts." The battle had just begun. But the general was no longer on defense. She was leading the charge. It began at dawn, not with a speech, not with a protest sign, but with a search warrant. FBI agents, clad in tactical gear, descended upon the home of Officer Brent Holloway. Another team hit the office of Judge William Harper. Simultaneous raids swept through the homes and offices of 18 confirmed gatekeepers, police, prosecutors, and political aides, inside their hands. Evidence pulled from Officer Chen's hidden drive: audio recordings, deployment documents, bank transfers, the full web of corruption laid bare. And at the center of it all, State Senator Gregory Maddox, the man who had spent decades building a quiet order within Texas law enforcement. The man Elijah Westbrook had died trying to expose. The man whose voice, clear as day, was captured saying, "We can't let black officers rewrite the chain of command. One general down means two think twice. Keep the ranks clean. Keep the streets quiet." It was treason, dressed as tradition. And now, it was public. At a federal courthouse in downtown Houston, Lieutenant General Naomi Westbrook stood before a sea of cameras and a nation watching in disbelief. She wore a clean uniform, her medals polished, her presence unshaken. "To those who called my son a threat for asking questions," she began, "you failed to silence him, and you will not silence me." She held up a thumb drive. "This contains everything Elijah uncovered. It's already been delivered to the Department of Justice, to Congress, and to the Inspector General of the U.S. Army." Behind her stood Agent Carter, now leading a multi-state task force on institutional discrimination within military-like law enforcement. Beside him, Officer Chen, still in recovery, now reinstated as liaison for internal investigations. Ava Westbrook, her daughter, stepped forward with legal documents in hand. "Today, we are filing a federal class action lawsuit on behalf of over 200 black veterans, officers, and service members who've experienced discrimination and targeted harassment. This is only the beginning." And then came the headline moment. Governor Michael Sanchez, who had previously stayed silent, approached the podium. "I came here today not as a politician," he said, "but as the father of a young black lieutenant who was recently profiled at a Texas checkpoint. I ignored the rot for too long, but after what happened to General Westbrook, the Westbrook family, and Elijah, that ends now." He held up a signed document. "Effective immediately, we are launching a statewide audit of law enforcement conduct related to military personnel and veterans, and I am proud to co-sponsor the Elijah Westbrook Act legislation to create permanent oversight of all security agencies operating on public grounds." Cheers erupted across the plaza, but Naomi wasn't done. 1 week later, at Heroes Memorial Cemetery, a newly renamed section of Jefferson Memorial, Elijah's funeral was finally completed. This time, no barricades, no threats, no armed segregation. The honor guard presented the folded flag with dignity. Ava read Elijah's final letter in full, and Naomi, standing before his grave, saluted him not just as a mother, but as a general who had carried her fight to victory. And then, without warning, a familiar figure arrived. "Senator Maddox, Surrounded by aides, wearing a mask of grief, he stepped forward for the cameras. "General Westbrook," he said, "I wanted to personally pay my respects and assure you that I had no knowledge of—" But Naomi didn't let him finish. She reached into her jacket and pulled out a military challenge coin. Not any coin, but the one her son carried. On the back, it had been engraved with a date and a location, the coordinates of Maddox's secret meeting with military command. "Your voice is on the tape, Senator," Naomi said calmly. "The deployment change, the cover-up, the threats. You weren't just complicit, you were operational." The media closed in, Senator Maddox froze, cameras rolled, and from behind Naomi, military police stepped forward. Senator Gregory Maddox, one of them, announced, "You are under arrest for conspiracy to commit negligent homicide of Captain Elijah Westbrook, obstruction of justice, and abuse of national defense infrastructure." Gasps. Then applause. Naomi said nothing more. She didn't need to. Justice had spoken. In the weeks that followed, dozens of officers were suspended or charged. The gatekeepers, once thought untouchable, crumbled as whistleblowers came forward, empowered by Naomi's stand. The Department of Defense launched a full review of deployment manipulation tactics. A national registry of misconduct cases involving veterans was created. Law enforcement promotions were now tied to cultural competency and bias training metrics. And perhaps most importantly, a federal law, the Military Dignity Protection Act, passed with bipartisan support, ensuring that no service member could be profiled, segregated, or threatened by any domestic agency without oversight and accountability. Naomi didn't seek glory, but the Westbrook Foundation for Military Justice, founded in Elijah's name, would ensure his mission lived on. It offered legal support, advocacy, and investigative aid for veterans targeted by institutional abuse. As for Naomi, she declined political offers and book deals. Instead, she returned to serve as a special advisor to the Inspector General on military reform. Because this wasn't just a win, it was a warning. To anyone who still believed that racism could hide behind badges and flags, Naomi's message was clear. We wore the uniform, we served with honor, and we won't let you dishonor us again. And with that, the mother who stood alone at her son's grave became the general who brought down a shadow empire. Would you have had the strength to keep fighting like General Westbrook? Comment below. And if you believe in standing against injustice, even when the system fights back, hit that like button, subscribe, and share this story with someone who still needs to see the truth.